If you're struggling with diabetes, then you need to watch this video right until the end. In this video, we'll be spending a lot of time looking at what causes diabetes, and that's for two reasons. Number one, I think that once we know the cause for something, finding the antidote or the cure for that is that much easier. And number two, personally, I've felt that once I have the rationale for something, I'm that much more willing to accept any such thing. I'm naturopath Gautam. I'm setting up a naturopathy center in Jaipur, India called Nirog Bhumi, and we'll be working at least initially only with diabetes patients so that we can work in much more focused manner. So what is it that really causes diabetes? Diabetes is a chronic condition where the body cannot manage sugar in the body. There are various types of diabetes. So you have type 1 diabetes, that is an autoimmune condition. You have type 2 diabetes where the body either isn't producing adequate amounts of insulin or it's not able to use the produced insulin, which is more popularly known as insulin resistance. There is type 3C diabetes where your pancreas get damaged, and of course there is also gestational diabetes that happens during pregnancy. In this video, we'll only be looking at type 2 diabetes, which is the most commonly type of diabetes found. Before we get into what causes diabetes, I would just want to quickly run through what are the symptoms of diabetes. So, excessive thirst, frequent urination, and that happens simply because the kidneys are working overtime in order to filter out the excess sugar from the body. People suffering with diabetes experience weight loss, and that's because the cells aren't absorbing the sugar in the body starts using fat and the muscle as fuel for the body, which is what leads to weight loss. Despite the fact that the body is swimming in a pool of glucose, because it isn't able to absorb all that glucose, it keeps craving for more and more of energy, and that is why a diabetic always feels so hungry. The fifth symptom is they experience blurred vision, and in extreme cases it can even lead to blindness. The sixth one is that the body is very slow to heal any cuts and bruises. The seventh one is people with diabetes suffer with high BP because something called atherosclerosis, which is simply accumulation of fat in the arteries. And lastly, people with diabetes suffer with peripheral neuropathy, which is numbness in the legs and the hands. Because the arteries are clogged with fat, the heart is unable to ensure that there is adequate blood that reaches the ends of our body, and that is why we experience numbness in the legs and the hands. Let us now look at the causes of diabetes, and as I've already said, want to spend adequate time studying the causes of diabetes. So diabetes is also known as a rich man's disease. As you can look at the image on the right hand side, which I've taken up from a Wikipedia entry, all the yellow colored areas, or those areas where the prevalence of diabetes is the least in the world, are countries in Africa which are the poorer countries in the world, whereas the red and the dark orange countries are all the developed parts of the world. If you look at the image on the left, you will see a clear positive correlation between states in India that have high per capita GDP and the incidence of diabetes, clearly suggesting that as incomes increase, the incidence of diabetes has also increased. Now, surely money is not causing, or more money is not causing diabetes. It's simply change in food habits as incomes increase that has led to higher prevalence of diabetes. In other words, it has been found that as incomes increase, people tend to consume high calorie food, which is what leads to diabetes. However, a 2017 Lancet study found that it's no longer just the wealthier communities that are prone to diabetes. Even the urban poor are experiencing higher incidence of diabetes. And that, as the study mentioned, is because of easy availability of cheap ultra processed foods. What are ultra processed foods? So chicken nuggets, frozen foods, potato chips. There are a number of reasons why ultra processed foods lead to high incidence of diabetes. Number one is these foods affect the gut microbiome, or the trillions of bacteria that are found in our gut. While the West is only now beginning to look at the impact of gut health on our overall health, naturopathy has forever believed that the gut is the most important thing to take care of for any disease that we are trying to solve. And that is the reason why a mud pack and enema is the first treatment that we look at for any problem that we are trying to solve. Secondly, ultra-processed foods are devoid of fiber. Foods that lack fiber cause sugar spikes in the body. Third thing is, fibrous foods keep the stomach full for longer periods, and that is why consumption of foods that are high in fiber, people who consume high amounts of fibrous foods tend to have lesser amounts of food. Lesser consumption of food puts lesser pressure on our digestive system, and that's why that keeps our liver and pancreas in good health. And lastly, high calorie food contributes to obesity, which again puts higher pressure on our liver and our pancreas and the digestive system in general, and higher pressure on pancreas would of course cause diabetes. The third cause for diabetes is chronic stress. Before we get into why stress causes diabetes, let us look at the bodily mechanism to stress. So whenever the body experiences stress, the hypothalamus, or the main control center in our brain, releases CRH, or the corticotropin releasing hormone, which in turn signals the pituitary gland to release adrenocorticotropic hormone, or the ACTH. The ACTH then in turn instructs the adrenal glands to produce more cortisol. The cortisol is the stress hormone in the body, or the fight or the flight hormone. Now, when we used to live in jungles, when we were faced with a real danger, for example, let's say we came face to face with a tiger. At that point in time, the adrenal gland would produce more of cortisol. Now, what cortisol does in the body is it switches off all the systems that may not be as important, and it activates the emergency system in our body, which means it increases the heart rate. It stiffens your muscle so that it is then in a position to face this danger the body has come face to face with. What the liver also does now, just to let you know, the liver is an organ that has a number of functions. One function that the liver has is it converts excess glucose in the body and stores it as glycogen. Now, whenever the body is faced with any danger, it reconverts this into glucose so that your muscles and the body in general is able to overcome this danger. And that is why whenever in the modern world people who face chronic stress will always experience high amounts of glucose or high amounts of sugar in their body because of this phenomena of the liver converting glycogen into sugar in order to deal with this stress. The fourth cause for diabetes is because of cellular biology. Cells need insulin to be able to absorb glucose in the bloodstream. In the absence of insulin, cells cannot absorb glucose, and therefore, despite the fact that the body is drowning in glucose, your cells are unable to absorb the glucose, and that is why the body becomes weaker and weaker. When cells cannot absorb glucose, they start using fat as their source of energy. This induces the liver to release more fat into the arteries, which is what hardens and narrows the artery, which in turn leads to higher blood pressure, it leads to heart disease, it can lead to stroke, it can lead to kidney disease, can lead to peripheral neuropathy. So in a nutshell, there are three causes for diabetes, which is consumption of high calorie food, consumption of higher amounts of ultra processed foods, chronic stress, and these three in turn lead to atherosclerosis, which is buildup of plaque in our arteries, which in turn can lead to heart disease, it can lead to stroke, it can lead to numbness of hands and legs, and so on. Now, having a very clear idea of what causes diabetes, let us look at what can cure these three causes and in turn clean up our arteries so that we do not suffer from any heart-related problems, we do not have kidney problems, we do not have vision problems, and of course, we do not suffer with peripheral neuropathy. So what I've done in this slide is I've listed down all of these four causes and I've tried to put down in bullet points, what is the cure for these four causes, and as we go ahead, we will look at each of these cure in greater detail. So number one cause was high consumption of high calorie food. We can consume a low calorie diet, we can avoid sugar, increase intake of foods that reduce blood sugar. Second cause was ultra processed foods. Take food in a form that is as close to the form in which nature gives it, or in other words, we consume food with the least amount of processing. Secondly, we increase intake of fibrous food. Third cause for diabetes was high amounts of stress. We will look at 4 stress management practices. Fourth cause was atherosclerosis. We can do Shatkarm. Shatkarm is 6 practices that can clean up the body. There is naturopathy treatment that is very good for cleansing the gut and in turn strengthening our digestive system. And thirdly, we can do asanas and pranayams for strengthening the digestive system and for, in general, increasing pran shakti or increasing vital force in the body. So the first thing is, what foods do diabetics need? So number one is they should take bitter and pungent foods. The first that I have on my list is Karela or bitter gourd. Second is Dana Methi or fenugreek. Dana Methi has high amounts of fiber. As I've already mentioned, fibrous foods prevent any sugar spike in the body. Third food is garlic. Garlic is very rich in vitamin B6 or pyridoxine. B6 is the one that is responsible for carbohydrate metabolism, which in turn ensures that there is no sugar spike in the body. Garlic is also rich in antioxidants. It's rich in vitamin C. It also contains allicin. Allicin is a compound that has been found to be anti-carcinogenic. It's good for the heart. Diabetic patients should consume high amounts of Karela, Dana Methi and garlic. Second that I have on my list is leafy greens. Leafy greens have been found to be rich in insulin-like chemicals and therefore all diabetics should increase consumption of leafy greens and preferably, as with all other foods, have them raw. Third is blackberry or jamun. Is rich in flavonoids, it's rich in polyphenols, it has high amounts of antioxidants, iron and vitamin C. Jamun is a fruit that that is very good for diabetic patients. Not only the fruit but even the seed and the leaves are very effective for controlling diabetes. I've also listed down 5 plant leaves that are very good for curing diabetes. So leaves of neem, jamun, sadabahar, Bael and tulsi are very good for controlling diabetes. Whole grains are also good for curing diabetes. As I've already mentioned, fibrous food is good for preventing any sugar spike because whole grains are rich in fiber. That is why diabetic patients should consume more of whole grains, which means that we should not consume maida. Maida is white flour. In turn, diabetes patients should increase consumption of millets. They should take more of brown rice. Both of these are rich in fiber and so should be good for managing sugar. Nuts and seeds are also good for diabetes patients and that's because they are rich in fat and protein. However, I would suggest that initially we should curtail consumption of nuts simply because nuts are they are rich in fat and protein and so they do put some pressure on the digestive system. A diabetic patient could have a weak digestive system and therefore initially it would be good to avoid consumption of nuts and seeds. Juices we should always begin our day with the juice. The ash gourd or safed peta, cucumber, bottle gourd or lauki and wheatgrass juice is what is good for diabetic patients. And lastly, curd and tomatoes are great sugar busters and therefore all diabetic patients should increase consumption of curd and tomatoes. And lastly, I have found water soaked overnight in ladyfinger or bhindi is very good for reducing diabetes. What are the foods that diabetic patients should avoid? Number one, as I've already mentioned, processed foods, sugary drinks, refined grains. Because refined grains do not have fiber, they can lead to a sugar spike. All saturated and trans fats, so fatty meats, fried foods, butter, all of these contain unhealthy fats which can increase the risk of heart disease and so should be avoided. And lastly, tea, coffee, milk, curd and buttermilk of course are fine. Salt, avoiding salt can also reduce blood pressure, which will be good for our heart. And lastly, diabetic patients should avoid spices, which should keep our heart in good health. The third thing that was there on our list was stress. And here I have 4 practices that will be very good in managing stress. I will take Vipassana and Anapan together. Anapan, of course, is the precursor to Vipassana. Anapan is just observing our breath. It's a great technique to manage stress because the brain is always contemplating things. It always has this buzz of thoughts going on. Anapan, by diverting attention away from the brain and diverting attention towards the breath, ensures that this buzz of activity going on in the brain comes down. Vipassana was a practice that was developed by Buddha. It basically scanning the body from the head to the toe. Again, as we divert our attention away from our brain and away from our thoughts, both Vipassana and Anapan are very good practices for managing stress. Yog Nidra, again, is a deep relaxation practice. It's a practice where, while the body is at rest, our brain is still in a state of awareness. Is a practice that helps the body to relax. And lastly, Shavasana or the corpse pose. Shavasana is a pose that is usually done at the end of yogic practice, and it is very effective in the body and the mind at rest. Fourth thing is Shatkarma. The Shatkarma is 6 Hatha Yoga practices, which is Tratak, Kapalbhati, Neti, Noli, Basti and Dhoti. So these are 6 practices that help clean the body. Kunjal involves drinking salty water and then expelling that salty water. Kunjal is very effective in cleaning the stomach and the esophagus. The second one is Jalneti. Jalneti is very good in cleaning the nasal tract. Now you may be wondering, what has cleaning the nasal tract got to do with diabetes? So number one, Neti is not just effective in cleaning the nasal tract, it also is very effective in dealing with any issues related to the eye and the ear. It has a very subtle influence on all the nerves that end in the nasal tract, and therefore it is very effective in dealing with eye and ear problems. And as I've already said, people with diabetes suffer with blurred vision, and so Jalneti could be very effective in strengthening our eyes. And number 2, and something which is more relevant, our left nostril represents the Ida Nadi and the right nostril represents the Pingala Nadi. Now the Ida Nadi represents our parasympathetic nervous system, and the Pingala Nadi represents the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is what gets activated when the body is in a state of stress. So, in a case where our left nostril is blocked and therefore we are engaging in more of right nostril breathing, that will activate the sympathetic nervous system, which in turn will lead to higher amounts of stress, which means that the body is using up more and more amounts of its energy, which also means a higher heart rate, which also means tighter muscles, which in turn means the liver releasing more sugar into the body. This is why Jalneti is very good or very effective and very useful for dealing with diabetes. The third Shatkarma activity which is good for dealing with diabetes is Basti. Basti is yogic enema, which cleans up the large intestine. And as I've already mentioned, enema is the first treatment that we do in naturopathy. The next thing which will be very effective in dealing with diabetes is natural treatment. mud pack reduce inflammation in the body, and therefore they are extremely good for dealing with all sorts of chronic problems such as diabetes, cancer, arthritis, and so on. The second natural treatment that I put down here is hot and cold abdominal fomentation. Hot and cold compresses increase blood circulation and therefore strengthen the digestive system. In fact, hot cold fomentation is the treatment that is taken before enema. That's because hot and cold fomentation loosens up the large intestine, and then the enema is used to flush out all the toxins from the large intestine. We also take hot and cold hip bath, or kati snan as it is known more popularly in India. Strengthens the digestive organs and therefore is good for diabetic patients. Hot cold bandages, again, as they boost blood flow, they are very effective in reducing pain and dealing with inflammation. And lastly, steam bath would be very effective. Steam bath opens up our pores and therefore promotes detoxification in the body. Yogasanas are also very good for dealing with diabetes. Yogasanas increase the quantity of beta cells in the pancreas. Beta cells is what is responsible for producing insulin in the body. Yogasanas also enhance glucose absorption by the cells, and so by doing yoga, our cells become strong enough to absorb more glucose. Third thing is yogasanas strengthen the digestive system, and as our liver, our pancreas, our large intestine becomes stronger, that should lead to better metabolism, which should reduce diabetes. And lastly, the Surya Namaskar puts the entire endocrine system in order, which increases the pran shakti in the body, which improves metabolism. Also, pancreas is a part of the endocrine system, and so doing Surya Namaskar should increase secretion of insulin, and which should bring down the blood sugar levels in the body. Pranayama is another practice that is very good for diabetics. Pranayama increases pran shakti in the body, which should lead to, which increases the vital force in the body, which in turn improves metabolism. And secondly, pranayama calms down the body and the mind, which should reduce stress, which again, as I've already mentioned, should be very helpful in dealing with diabetes. Here are three other practices that I put down. One is mudras. Mudras are specific hand gestures. The pran mudra and the apan mudra is very helpful in dealing with diabetes. There are three bandhs in yoga. The Udiyan bandh, which as you can see in this image, is extremely good for strengthening our digestive organs, and so the Udiyan bandh is very effective in dealing with diabetes. Acupressure or applying pressure on certain points in the body is also very good in dealing with diabetes. So there are acupressure points on our wrist, there are acupressure points on just below the knees. There is a point between the first and the second toe, which is very effective in dealing with diabetes. So what's the key takeaway from this video that any diabetic patient can walk away with? The first one is, rest assured that diabetes can be cured. Of course, all of this will need a lot of discipline from your side, but what I can assure you is that very easily you can overcome diabetes. I wish you all the very best, and I wish you that you enjoy life, you have a joyful life, and I wish you very good health. Thank you so much.